All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the what is this? The third in our speaker series, the first of our students. We are trying to go once a quarter. We're bringing a student, so we do have a treat for you this evening. Ian is a PhD candidate in industrial organizational psychology at North Carolina State University, where he also serves as a primary instructor in the Department of Psychology and the Department of Management, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship. He additionally serves as an adjunct instructor at Southeastern Oklahoma State University and Meredith College. His research focuses on nature contact and biophilic workspace design, which is bringing nature into the workspace, and he's going to tell you more about that in a minute. He works on employee trust, technology in the workplace, and employee health and well-being. He has consulted with companies and executives on topics ranging from AI integration into work processes to psychometrics and scale development. He's also presented on various topics because he just can't seem to let himself get bored at conferences such as the Academy of Management, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, the First International Network on Trust, and this is a long one, the 21st Century Summit on Positive Psychology, Women, Mental Health, and Entrepreneurship. Whew. So now that I'm all out of breath from all of that, I am going to hand you off to Ian and enjoy. Take it away, Ian.
All right, all right. Let me get this started by sharing my screen. All right, can y'all hear me and see my screen? Looking to Lee, fantastic. All right, so Lee introduced me with everything. Move this over here a little bit. I think my super short summary of that is I'm a nerd and I'm a high energy about the things I nerd about. And so if you interact with me, chances are I'll have resources for you, I'll share them for you. And if I start on a topic, I get fascinated with it and dive deep. To me, nature has been one of those things. That's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. So, to give you the background, because we got to start somewhere. This is little Ian, tiny Ian, and then a little bit more new, aged up Ian, though even still a little bit less facial hair than right now. I grew up my entire life in what I lovingly call, and Lee has heard me say this, trees and deer, Pennsylvania. We had trees, we had deer, and that was great. I got to go in the park that was my backyard. You had the deer and the squirrels, and these are actual photos. I grew up with a DSLR camera as well, very nice. So you get photos of the deer off of my backyard, and throughout a lot of my life, nature was something that was, pun non or intended, natural. It was something where, I would be stressed and I'd go outside. I'd go stack rocks. And so these are actually stacks that ended up being kind of 9 feet tall. I got in trouble a few times because they were deemed dangerous, but I always knocked them down before I left to make sure I didn't crush a small child. But this was me going outside and interacting with nature, and that felt good. When I was stressed, I'd go outside for a walk. When I was feeling a little bit crappy, I'd go outside. I'd take a breath of fresh air if I needed a break. I'd go outside if I needed to just feel energized. And so doing that was very natural to me, but it wasn't my area of research at the time. It was just something that was natural. Then I entered into this field of IO-psychology, industrial organizational psychology, the idea of, well, this is the workplace. And what can we do about the workplace? And one of the key problems when we talk about the workplace is stress and is burnout. There's actually even more recently than this, Gallup, I think it's either December or earlier in January, just put out the report saying that burnout's at an all-time high again for the working population. And it's kind of one of the grand challenges for management psychologists, work psychologists to say, well, there's this burnout, there's this stress. And to me, it was a kind of a natural connection of, well, I feel really good when I'm interacting with nature, when I'm outside, when there's plants near me. I have this kind of sense of refreshment. Does that apply to other people? Am I the outlier? I don't think so. And so when I had the chance getting into IO and thinking about this nature topic and thinking about the connection, you look at the statistics in the workplace, and especially in the US, just the US alone, the average person spends about a third of their life at work. And increasingly, that work is indoors and less in contact with nature. When you think about modern design, it's nice and sleek. You've got the clean lines, the white walls, everything is clean and angular and boxy and uncomfortable. And there's no nature. There's no organic components. And you have this burnout, and I think, well, what if we bring in nature? Can nature be an effectively low cost but incredibly effective intervention to make workplaces healthier? In all of my research, one of the big through threads is I want the workplace to be somewhere that adds years onto your life rather than takes them away. And right now, a lot of workplaces are taking years away from people's lives, but how can they add them on? And to me, nature was one of those things. And so, excuse me, I didn't mean to go to the end of the slideshow. Bar me just a moment while I go back through my slide deck. We're back. So, the mandatory, all the little bits and bops, these are some of the things that I've done in this space. Papers, currently some that are under review, some that we're writing. My dissertation is on the topic of kind of evaluating of, does nature, if you show someone nature in a job ad, does that make them more likely to accept that position or to view a lower salary as desirable? So looking at those real tangible components. And then I've talked a lot at conferences about various topics in and around nature and nature contact. So this will be another edition of that. But two key terms, two things that are critical to know what the hell I'm talking about with any of this. First and foremost is nature contact, right? Nature contact is, by definition, and I will have to do what I hate doing, which is read off the slide a little bit. It's interaction between humans and natural elements such as animals, plants, landscape views, and the greater outdoors. You will likely, even by the end of this presentation, even if you read a lot in this field, have a fundamental question, and that question will likely be, so what is nature? I get it, it's all this stuff, but where are the bounds? Where are the ends of what nature can be? And that's a great question. That's one that we really don't have the perfect answer to right now. But we do have some breakdowns that can be helpful. So when we're talking about nature, you can talk about direct experience of nature. That's going to be referring to natural features like light, air, water, plants, animals, weathers, natural landscapes, ecosystems, actual direct contact with components of nature. Then there's indirect experiences of nature, which are things like images of nature, natural materials, using wood in construction, natural colors, simulating natural light or air, using naturalistic forms, curvatures rather than straight lines, evoking or imitating nature. Here's also where you see a whole nother, and this will be a rabbit hole that I'll go on if someone wants me to talk about this towards the end, a whole other realm of biomimicry, which is actively trying to mimic nature one-to-one in a human-built environment. But those are indirect experiences where you're in contact with something that is like nature, but not directly nature. And then one step further from that would be experiences of space and place. That gets a little bit more abstract, and I'll dive into each of these a little bit further without going into too obsessively much depth, which I'm one to do. But these are attributes of nature, like the prospect of refuge, having your cave, your den, your safe kind of corner, having organized complexity. When you look at like the golden ratio and where you see these in nature, but also in human architecture, using patterns, transitional spaces, the ability to wayfind and explore in your space to mimic some of the processes and experiences of nature in a built environment. So those are the three kinds of contact that I'll be talking about a little bit more: the direct experience, the indirect, and the experiences of place and space that are similar. The second definition there biophilic design, biophilia, also the fun one when you say, oh yeah, I study biophilia. And they're like, oh, what weird sex thing is that? It's not. Biophilia is the love of nature. It's from a book, actually, I do have it. It's from a guy named E.O. Wilson, who published the book Biophilia. And it's all about the natural evolutionary love and desire to be in contact with nature for humans. And so biophilic design is designing physical spaces. It's an architectural approach that designs physical spaces with human health and well-being in mind, and specifically by integrating nature in these various ways. So that's like nature contact, nature design. Often, I think if I had done this call at an earlier time in the day, I might be like, oh, show me outside. Can you see nature from your where you're sitting right now? But it's at least cold and night where I am right now, so that's less applicable. But we might still do that a little bit later on. But so that's nature contact biophilic design. That's the space that I'm really interested in. Now, in case you need to get bought in, let me first just throw out some of the initial benefits here that get you bought into this idea as being one that's worthwhile for IO psychology, for the world of work, for architecture in general. There are various and sundry benefits. Each of these, I can throw you at least 20 to 30 articles to help support, and up to hundreds if you want just a bunch of articles. Again, if you like this topic, nerd out with me. I can help you. But physical benefits, these are the core. This, I will say, management and IO Psych have comparatively just begun to dip their toes in the proverbial water that is this research space of biophilic design and nature in the workplace. But that doesn't mean we haven't had some evidence long before that, right? E.O. Wilson in the 50s and 60s, and even before that, the health benefits you get a lot from the physical health sciences, from the healthcare space, from public health. And you see things like enhanced physical fitness, lower blood pressure, better immune response, lower inflammation levels. And it's this very physical reaction to having contact with the natural environments being beneficial almost across the board. Now, of course, there's always going to be some asterisks here. I am a psychologist by training, which means it depends will always be the core phrase. I'm happy to talk about some of those it depenses later. You also get things, so in addition to these kind of physical benefits, you get the mental health benefits. And so there are kind of robustly supported benefits of contact with nature, helping to increase things like satisfaction, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, reduce burnout, help people overall feel more creative, more productive, help them just feel better, both healthy, both in terms of their physical and in terms of their mental health. And then in case you needed a few more, we also see things like positive behavioral change, people developing better coping strategies, enhancing their attention. There's actually a whole theory that I didn't want to dive too far into in this presentation because I was told, hey, do not spend a whole hour talking, called attention restoration theory. And attention restoration theory broadly says that nature, the stimuli of nature, provide this kind of relaxation, this nuance. It's a different kind of stimuli that allows you to refresh, to relax, and then be able to focus in on the next task. And so this idea of attentional restoration comes in with the positive behavioral change. You also get increased social interactions, especially if there are nature spaces with which people can engage, interact with one another. And then things like lower hostility and aggression. So, maybe if you're working in a high intensity workspace, you're like, let's put some trees in here and hope that people don't harm each other. We'll touch on all those nuances as well. And then, of course, it would be remiss to not talk about some of the workplace results that we found in research right now. The obvious things like increased satisfaction, well-being, people enjoy and feel good in spaces designed with nature. And what does with nature mean? I'll talk about that and give some examples and show some case studies as well as we go forward. But you get increased energies, pro-social energy, cognitive energy, creative energy, reductions in stress, burnout recovery, engendering resilience across the board, increasing your cognitive capacity, increasing your creativity. And then if you want to put the financial dollars to dollars, improved productivity and improved performance. And so you can put direct financial inputs here to say, people not only feel better, they're not only happier, more satisfied, more comfortable, more creative, but they're actually more productive when they have the ability to have contact with nature. And it doesn't just have to be during work. And again, we'll talk about some of these. There's a a figure that I really like. So this was a recent conceptual piece by Klotz and Bellino, Anthony Klotz, Mark Bellino, in 2021 that talked about specifically at work. So starting to bring this down from the idea of like nature's great into, well, where is it great? Where am I trying to apply it? The workplace. And so how does it function in the workplace? And they give it this kind of nice, simple model where there are 4 levels or 4 depths of contact with nature. The first we kind of talked about or I hinted at earlier is the idea of representations of nature, right? That can be the wood in the building materials, the curved structure of buildings. Then you have outdoors via a physical barrier. So I hope, I can't see apart from Lee and Pam. Pam, I can't tell if there's actual daylight coming from the side of your screen or if it's I see a nod. Actual daylight, good. So that would be an example potentially of outdoors via physical barrier. There's a window in the way. You still see the outside, but you are separated from it. Then there's outdoors brought indoors. And this, I think, is where people most often think of classic biophilic design interventions of like, I put a plant on my desk, plant inside. It's a very simple example of taking the outdoors and bringing it indoors. And then the most kind of immersive or the most depth of scope would be outdoor breaks, where you are actually during a workday going outside, taking a break outside. And so those are all different ways to have contact with nature. And this conceptual piece argues that that helps to rejuvenate your potential energies, your cognitive energy, emotional, prosocial, physical energies. But I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of these, because even before Klotz and Bellino gave these, there were some more fundamental ideas by Kellert. This was Kellert 2013 is really the good citation here. But there are 6 features of biophilic design. I'll briefly run through them, and then I'll show you case studies of each one. So the first feature of good biophilic design, and this will apply to the workplace in our context, is environmental features, using characteristics of the natural world in the built environment. Again, I'll show you examples of these in a second. I don't want to go to the end of my presentation. You see Pat there. I don't know why it continues to send me back to the beginning of my presentation, but I will muscle forward. So, second is going to be natural shapes and forms. So these are representations of the natural world, both internally and externally. Think of these much more as your actual architectural structures being shaped like nature. Think ovals, spheres, curvature, not just the straight lines that make up the factory assembly line. We want to move away from those. Then you have natural patterns and processes. So this not only ties into actual like architectural patterns, mandalas, spiderweb pattern, not only the patterns, but processes is an interesting term here. We'll break down some of what that means, but this is where you dive into, well, how does it feel to be in nature? And how do we mimic that when you're not in nature, when you are in the workplace? And so I'll talk about a few examples there. Then things like light and space. Light, there was a Harvard Business Review article, I'll cite it later. It says light is one of the most attractive things for people in a workplace. Having access to natural light. I don't know how many of you have had the misfortune of having to work in an office with no windows. I certainly know that my lab here at NC State was a closet. It was an interior closet with a kind of dingy light. And I would have given, I won't say anything, I would have given quite a lot to have a window or some approximation thereof. And that seems to be something that is actually repeated. If you look at the general workforce, having access to natural light is so incredibly beneficial. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Then place-based relationships is really just a sense of connection with the actual location. So if your workplace exists in a field, do you feel like there is actually a connection, a through thread where that field becomes part of the workplace? Or is your workplace this kind of cube that sits in the middle and kind of separates, here's the nature, here's the building? And so kind of bringing those together is that sense of relationship. And then the evolution, this kind of gets a little bit esoteric, but the evolution of human nature relationships. How do you interpret, understand, and build an environment to support the idea of having an actual relationship with nature beyond just its presence as a tool? So as a general thing, like, cool, these are all good conceptually. Show me the case studies. So what does this actually look like? So I'll do for the first one here. This is a company called Thermery. It's in Estonia. And as a company, they manufacture interior catting and sauna materials. As you might expect from, the Estonia, they're helping build saunas. If you ever had the Estonian sauna, it's fantastic. But they build the materials. And so part of their company culture was around this idea of timber. And so what they did, they worked with a designer who worked with biophilic design. They said, well, how can we incorporate this natural element, this feature, into our actual workplace? And so they redesigned their offices, and you can see some examples here. These are all from the workplace, where they have not only trees, a literal tree inside the office, but using wood in a variety of different ways as the actual construction material for the tables, for the walls, for the artistic features. It's all about lumber and wood, and their idea was to bring the love of timber to the staff, the clients, and the visitors alike. And so they really focused on using natural materials, in this case wood, colors that were associated with wood, access to sunlight. So you can see some in that bottom picture there where the sunlight's shining through. And so the idea of environmental features is really just that. It's how can we pick any feature of the environment and bring it indoors? And that can range widely. It could just be colors, that your palette is greens and browns and oranges that represent sun, or blues, natural colors. It could be water features, bringing in actual water features into your workplace. Having outdoor air able to circulate through the space. There's a really cool study that looked at people's preferences of office spaces, and all they changed was the air condition. Was it completely internally circulated air, mixed internal-external air, or open only external air? And without them actually knowing, the participants never knew what the condition was. They reported feeling better and liking the workplace better when there was mixed or outdoor air. Pure example of, you don't know that anything has changed, but you still prefer this. That's this idea of bringing in a natural environmental feature into the workplace. Now, you could also go a little bit further if you want to be wacky, and this is the really kind of cutting edge here. Is Klotz, I know, Lamb, Tong, a few other people are working with animals. That animals are part of the natural environment. And so bringing animals into the workplace is one of those, you got to do it right. You'd be like, oh, we have crocodiles in the workplace to make you feel like you're in contact with nature. Okay, maybe that's not going to help. But to some extent, bringing animals into the workplace, even if it's like therapy dogs, can be a benefit that is tied to this idea of bringing nature inside. And then, of course, green walls, having a green facade, having fire, ideally controlled, in the workplace, a hearth. All of these can be bringing natural materials, natural features into the workplace. That's that first idea. The second idea, this natural shapes and forms, this is pretty aptly named the biomimetic office in Switzerland. And the biomimetic office was a collaboration between an engineer and an architectural designer to design a building that followed or mimicked the physical structure of, I believe in this case, it was a variety of fish. And you can see in the building, it's got these weird curvatures and it's got these circular designs. There's nary a straight line to be seen, at least on the horizontal axis. Of course, you have to have some supporting beams, which are going to be straight vertical. But this is an example of mimicking nature. You also see this, even if you think of like the Sydney Opera House, mimicking the kind of shell structure, directly mimicking the forms of nature. Another example of this, this is in Belgium. It's the Silver Square office, where they have actual walls that look like they're part of a cave, just as part of the workplace, and stairs that mimic stone. And so mimicking that local geology, mimicking things like shells and spirals and trees and archways, that all ties into this idea of making the shape and the form of an environment natural. Then you get into patterns and processes, and this one I said was a little bit weird but fun. So this is the first one over here on my left is the Robert and Arlene Kogard courtyard in the Smithsonian, the American Smithsonian, Washington, D.C. And so this was built where you have a ceiling that has natural patterns, shading of light, but also a space that has bounded walls. It has space that you can explore, but you can see everything. So it gives you that sense of refuge, but also this idea of pattern and the ability to explore. And the light is going to change throughout the day, as it would in nature. One of those processes that you don't think about if you spend all of your life inside an office with a little buzzing light ahead of you is that light doesn't change. It's the same light. And then when you leave, it's dark again. And that can be very depressing of going like dark, it's this fake light, and then dark again. This would be an example of building in the process of lighting change into the architecture of a space. Now, of course, at a small scale, you could just make a window, and a window would do that partially. This adds the whole roof to kind of make it more interesting, and the pattern you see on the wall is almost honeycomb-like, mimicking that actual structure again. And then over here with the bridge, this is the Henderson Bridge in Singapore. And one of the key features here is those little covered areas. And the idea of those covered areas was to give a sense of refuge. Again, mimicking the processes of nature where you find refuge, you find places that are secure and protected. And so these little alcoves all the way along this bridge give this sense of refuge. There's also natural processes that may be less intuitive, and these are the ones that I find fun. Things like a sense of peril. So this is the levitated mass, fairly famous. It's at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. A big boulder, and you can walk under it. But even if you go to tall stairwells, if you think like the Harry Potter, most people know this reference, I hope you will, the Harry Potter scene where you have the changing stairwell, and you look down, and it's all the different stairs changing. You will actually see that in a lot of modern buildings, where if you look down, you can see all the different, almost Escher-esque stairwells or stair columns. Part of that idea is the sense of peril, the sense of risk that is innate to nature, that it's not all just clean, clear, slick hallways where you can see directly to the end and everywhere you're going, but that there's a sense of scale and risk, and that can be almost counterintuitively rejuvenating. It can make you feel better, enjoy a space more, rather than being in this clean, controlled, cubicle-esque space. And so all of these processes, there's a ton, just as a few examples, contrast, having the perception of wholeness in a space, having refuge, the idea of exploration, the ability to explore a space. If you're in an office building with a bunch of cubicles, there's not much exploration to be had. In nature, there's all kinds of things for you to explore and see and perceive. And then, of course, things like materials changing over time, light features changing over time. That ability of change, that sensory variability, is a key part of these natural processes. I said light and space. I'm coming back to light and space. This will be quick and easy. Light, natural light, is fantastic. An interplay of light and shade. Having natural light or filtered natural daylight in an office is one of the most attractive features in office design in general. If you want to attract people to your company, at least have windows. That's like the one minimal thing. If you got nothing else, have some windows, have light pools, play with shadow, play with light. One of my favorites is, say you don't have access to windows. You're like, hey, I've got an office and I cannot build it out. I'm not allowed to take down the wall and it doesn't have a window. What can I do? Play around with light. You can have, I wish I had one with me. You can even 3D print these little facades, little kind of masks that just have leaves on them. And when you put them over a light, it casts this almost leaf-like image on the wall. That's still playing with light in a way that appears and feels natural, in a way that you really wouldn't get otherwise. And so that idea of playing with shadow and light and natural form, you can also here have things like variability, having light that doesn't just stay one color the entire day. There are actually lights that you can install that shift throughout the day and give you a full cycle of different colors of light as you go through the day to make you feel like even if you're not at all in contact with nature, maybe you feel like you're a little bit in contact with nature. So that's light, and then space, having those larger spaces, spaces with refuge, but also the ability to explore. As far as place-based relationships, this is an example. It's called, oh, I don't want to murder this name. Midla, the Midla Nature Resort, also in Estonia, as an example. It's a resort where the actual resort facility is one, built out of completely wood, but also built into the local geology. It is one with the land around it. This idea of connection with the natural space is one that, again, there are a variety of different approaches within the space, biophilia being one of them, that humans have this natural inclination to be connected with nature. But the idea of being one with the nature around you and having that relationship, that sense of stewardship over the nature around you. You can also see things like the spirit of a place, bringing the spirit of the surrounding area into your building of your actual structures or workplace. I won't spend too much time there because most people don't have the opportunity to build a space in its entirety like that. But this one's really fun, and I just love this example. I love Singapore. This is the Jewel at Changi Airport. So if you ever get to go to Changi Airport in Singapore, this is where all of the different, what were they called? All of the different terminals, all the three terminals connect at what's called the Jewel. And it's where all these terminals connect, and it's the largest man-made waterfall. It's called the Rain Vortex. This is what the innermost sanctum of that airport looks like. It's a forest. You are surrounded by an actual forest with this beautiful waterfall in the middle. Built into an airport, right? Just an airport. This idea of evolved human-nature relationships. So not only are you building a space surrounded by nature or retroactively putting nature inside, but this is a forest and an airport. It is truly an integration of human and natural structure and function. Another example of that, perhaps more practical for anyone who's interested in the hospitality world, there's a hotel chain called One Hotels, like number one hotels. It's in North America. It's also in Australia. They very strategically redesigned all of their structures to prioritize biophilic design. So things like having plants inside and outside, using sustainable materials, building their facilities to meld in with the environment around them. All of these very intentional choices to not only be one with nature, but to actively also be supporting things like sustainability, using good resources, benefiting the nature that is around them. It's this idea of kind of evolving these relationships. So you look at all that and you hear me yapping, and you go, okay, well, what does this mean? What can we actually do with this crap? And so here's where we'll see how much people want to nerd out with me. I'd like to open this up for a little bit of back and forth. I certainly have tons of ideas. I can talk for endlessly on this. But I want to hear what some other people say, either in the chat or if you want to come off mute. Lee, do I have permission to do this, by the way? Fantastic. What can you do? Now, I'm not talking as an IO psychologist. I'm not talking as a business leader. I'm talking in your day-to-day life, at home or in your workplace. What could you or do you do to interact with nature? So I'll say anyone can pop in the chat. Anyone can speak out loud if they want. What can you do?
I'll start, Ian, and just like you noticed, I've got, drapes open in my window here. Need natural light. Even though I do my run in the morning, I still need natural light. It just helps so much that I'm not sitting in a dark box.
Love it. Thank you.
I've worked in one of those stone walls, like the stones in the back of your current room. I had an office long time ago. No windows, no nothing.
And you'll know, so this will be a full tangent. I won't go too far down. These, for anyone who's seen me previously, will notice these used to be green. It's like, well, why'd you make them white? You're not doing the thing you're supposed to be doing. I'm actually going to be painting natural landscapes on each of these, so you'll begin to see them become more natural over the course of the next couple of weeks, or if you see me pop on a call here and there. But yeah, the access to a window, truly, it cannot be understated. What else? What do you? Oh, I see something in the chat. Oh, opening a window. Oh, Brian, you made me remember. I forgot to talk about two other areas. So we talked a lot about the visual. I'm responding to in the chat as well for the recording, who probably can't see the chat. Brian was talking about, sounds like opening a window would be good, but also the idea of temperature, and when temperature comes into things, yes, there's the positive and the negative, right? Of if it's freezing outside, contact with nature, you probably don't want to be fighting for your life in your workplace and freezing or boiling hot. But within some regulation, external air can be good. But there's also this whole realm that I didn't even talk about with auditory nature. There's whole studies looking just at the actual hearing nature. Has anyone in the chat, just real quick, in a yes or a no, have you been to the Frankfurt airport in Germany? Lee, I'm sure you have. If you've been there recently enough, you'll notice there's something unique about the bathrooms. You go, well, there's a lot. They're actually clean. But if you go in, you hear birds. There's just bird sounds playing 24/7. And there's also fake outdoor sunlight. It's frosted, but it's not real lighting. It's artificial outdoor lights and bird sounds 24/7. Now, compare that to when I fly home to good old Philadelphia airport and you get a very different experience. But that's a very intentional choice. That's not expensive, right? Playing some bird sounds over the speakers and putting in a fake light. But that's the adding in the auditory element, adding in the tactile felt element in addition to what you see. And I saw in the chat, I nerded out about this too. That's why I'm here. I keep a lot of plants on my desk. Yes. A lot of decor. It's all green and brown. I have a photo of the mountains. Essential oils, adding in the olfactory component, right? Can you smell nature? And that smell is also beneficial. And I'll even say, and this is another tangent for another time, perhaps to go fully into, even if you can't have real plants, you're like, I've got the death thumb. I kill every plant that I try to have. Well, welcome to my little Lego succulent. Because there's research showing that fake plants, or like zombie plants or Legos, provide some of the same benefits in terms of the kind of mental health benefits, the restoration, because you're still looking at something that is natural, something that is nature oriented. So you still do see those benefits. Good guy, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, two things that came to mind, well, a few things that really made me excited about you saying the impact it has. One, when I first renovated my house, I changed my entire kitchen window. So it had like a full bay window from floor to ceiling, just so I had the full vantage point of the front, just my front entrance. And the light that I get from it just brings me so much joy, especially in the afternoons. And I didn't realize how much until I started working from home more recently in December. And it's just that afternoon light and everything is just so amazing. And of course, I relocated my office to that window and more where I have my plants as well, because I'm a plant mom. And so those are just some of those things that I realize how much joy those little things do bring me that I didn't always get to bring to work. So
Thank you. And if you ever, for anyone, want a plant that's hard to kill, grows fast, and is very nice, fairly non-allergenic, snake plants. Snake plants tend to be very good. It's hard to kill them. Like, it's actively hard. Even if you've got the death thumb, it's hard to kill a snake plant. You can even just put them in water. Pathos too. And if you get a little arrow garden, you can do basil, then make it into your sandwiches in the morning or something like that. Always great. And Vincent in the chat as well. Oh, spider plants, yeah. Taking breaks outside. So one of the other papers that Klotz and Bellino worked on, and some of their colleagues, was looking at nighttime nature walks and their benefits at work the next day, and found that going on nighttime nature walks was beneficial for when they came back into the workplace the next day. There's also research about going surfing and how going surfing gives benefits for like the next week. And so even this outside of work nature contact still having benefits as part of the work life, even if you're not in a very natural space during the day. But yeah, thank you all for putting in the chat as well as talking of bring plants in. Easy. Do that. I don't care if they're fake. I don't care if you go to Target and get the $5 little fake plants. I have those all over the place. Get something green in your office space. This is my call to you right now. Something green. Even if it's a paint, or you can do a book. Maybe you're like, you've got a nice little book about nature and design. You just kind of put it on a shelf. Beautiful. It's got a picture of nature on it. There is research on all of those. So most of the research is on real plants. It's a lot of the history about green space. There is burgeoning research looking at fake plants, looking at pictures of plants, looking at brownscapes like deserts or bluescapes like ocean, and still seeing benefits of contact with those things, both directly and in kind of pictorial or representative form. Okay, so this is one. Now I'm going to challenge you a little bit in a world of IO-Psych and management, and say, hey, what can organizational leaders do? Say they're now armed with all the information and perhaps a little bit more than what I've just told you. What could organizational leaders do to make use of that? I'm in a room of biopsychologists. I know someone's got an opinion here. Vincent in the chat, more office plants. Yeah, sure. Physical office design. Say, hey, I'm building the office with more plants. What else?
Well, a lot of it's going to come down to what you have available, because not everybody's going to have the option to do a remodel or a relocate, or some are on shoestring budgets and they can't even afford new office plants or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you can look at your office policies to say, we're going to allow office plants, but maybe you encourage office plants, but maybe you didn't before. You can encourage, you can see if there's a possibility of creating an outdoor seating area if you don't already have one, and maybe encourage coffee breaks sitting outside. You can encourage, in nice weather, you can encourage a 10-minute brisk walk around the parking lot or something. You can schedule your meetings for the sunny side of the building. If you've got multiple conference rooms.
Yeah.
Because if you've got them scattered around the building, pick the one that's on the side that's getting some sun. If from mud of a forest is a background like that, then that's good. And then of course, if in today's world, if you really want to get down to it, just let your people work remote and then tell them to go outside and touch the grass.
This is going to be, I can't go on this tangent yet, but Lee, the idea of creating a system, this is a bit of a tangent off of what you just said, creating a system that tracks which rooms have light for while you're scheduling meetings, like in the scheduling system, saying, well, this room has sunlight during these hours, is so genius. I very much may steal and credit you for that. That is a very, very smart idea.
That sounds like maybe that's something, a collaboration with one Ms. Ashley, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Pair up with Ashley, tie Vincent in there.
Little thing, yeah, good work. Little collaboration.
And then everything you just mentioned.
You could do a bring your pet to work day.
Yeah.
You
Again,
can
this
see,
that gets into a realm where you have to be a little bit iffy of like, well,
that's
what
true.
if someone has a phobia of dogs?
Could be a little issue, or somebody's pet boa constrictor could have a problem with somebody's pet hamster. I mean, you gotta be. I mean, you gotta be kind of. You might want to do a little survey about that first. But
Hmm.
but we love surveys too. So
Hmm. And there's a again this goes into stuff I didn't want to take too much time to talk about in this, but I'm happy to talk about more. There's a model by Mercier and colleagues in 2021 that also has a pathway of harm where there is the potential for certain harms with contact with nature. Allergies being one, where if you have very bad allergies, maybe saying, oh, go outside and go for a walk really isn't that great. Or let's bring dogs into the office. And you're like, well, I'm deeply allergic to dogs. So there are certain components. Now, on whole, the benefits outweigh those costs in almost every circumstance, but worthwhile to consider for what we're going to talk about in a moment. But I want to just read through this last one in the chat. Yeah, taking lunch away from the office. And as leaders, Lee, to your point, I love when you said policy, you saw me like cheering. The idea of saying it's okay to take 10 minutes and go for a walk. That is a culture. That is a policy that begins at the top by saying, yeah, or hey, we're going to do a Zoom meeting, but it's going to be audio only, with the expectation that you can go and walk around and take this as a walking meeting. Or hey, I want to have a meeting with you. Let's do this as a walking meeting. And let's walk outside a little bit or walk through this area that has some windows in it. And so all of those policies that allow people to feel safe, psychologically safe, or to feel like they are not only enabled, but encouraged to contact nature, go outside. And then again, yeah, if you have a little bit more money, maybe instead of buying plants, it's a plant budget where you have an entirely remote workforce and you go, hey, y'all all have $5, $10 a month to buy plants from our little plant shop, and it'll be sent right to your home. And the idea being that everyone's going to now have some plants.
they have swag shops. Why not?
Yeah,
Put it in a little company branded pot. Why not?
I love it.
But I used to do that when I was still in the Navy. When somebody was just one of those that didn't get out of their desk, I'd walk by their desk, go take a walk with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we go somewhere because then we go talk about something as we walk to a different building or something. Maybe I was just getting a cup of coffee, but today I want to get a coffee from the break room in this other building.
Mm-hmm.
I heard it was good. We're gonna give it a try. But sometimes if you're the supervisor, you have to do that to get people to get out of their damn chair. Get out of your chair.
Get up, get outside. You're spending a third of your life at work, at least to spend some time outside. And Lee, I mean, to the perfect point, right? These are what organizational leaders can do, but the final, perhaps ultimate boss question of what can IO psychologists do, or what should IO psychologists be doing? For those of you who don't recognize, this is Pat Powser, as well as myself, Lee, and Rich as the images here, all members of this group, all fantastic people. But what can we do? What should we be doing armed with this knowledge? What can we do? You can even expand this to what can we as professionals do? If you're not directly in IO psychology, maybe you're in management, architecture, some related field. What can we as professionals do to utilize this information, to make use of it? Pop back out here so I can stare at everyone, or stare at the cat. Speaking of nature, as well as my own ADD. Oh yeah, I'm reading the chat. Spill into occupational health, so OHP, or occupational health psychology. One of the big areas where we talk about nature well-being. Similarly, you'll see well-being programs, or the idea of optimal functioning. So optimal functioning is one of those key areas where you see overlap, where companies say, hey, we want people to perform well. And I think, oh yeah, James is here. James, you're gonna get this. You're the expert of this. I've worked with James on a few proposals as well that we're doing, but the idea of well-being and optimal functioning, that part of that can be nature. And what we see of like, oh, well, we want people to perform well. Well, guess what makes them perform well? When they feel good, when they're healthy enough to perform well. That, in fact, well-being should be a metric. You should be evaluated. You should be evaluating leaders on how healthy their employees are, on how good they feel, not just how satisfied they are, not just how much they're churning out, but are they healthy? Are they able to stay at the company for a long time because they want to, because they feel good? So bringing nature is one of those key ways that IO psychologists can begin to integrate into that conversation. I'm reading the chat as well. Sarah, taking the work environment, nature integration into account as a factor when examining how to change workplaces for the better. Yeah. You're saying, hey, we want people to feel better. You're like, oh, well, we can have a pizza party in this white room with nothing on the walls. And we could like give people a bonus that they can spend for their white room with straight walls. It's like, okay, well, at some point you can do a lot, but you can spend less and just say, let's integrate nature in here and really have a meaningful benefit that can be above and beyond a pizza party, a recognition thing, but it's like a recognition, but also saying we're recognizing you and we'd like to make your workplace better. We'd like you to enjoy this space more. And so we're bringing nature in as a first step. Oh yeah, Brian talking about the idea of the 4-day work week of Fridays or Monday. Oh, sorry, not even the 4-day work week. The idea of Fridays and Mondays where office dogs can come in. And I would even tie into that potentially a 4-day work week style where you say Friday is when all of the animals get to come in. And if you're allergic, you don't want to interact with animals, that's fine. It counts as also a day where you don't have to be in the office. And we encourage you to use that time to go outside. You see this as well with things like wellness programs.
Well,
let's compensate you.
You
Oh,
could
go
tie
Lee.
that. You could tie that to your insurance too. It just remove the copay from allergy medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and even say things like, hey, if you track a certain number of steps outside, right, we will give you either healthcare benefits, health insurance benefits, or direct compensation to say, yeah, we want to reward you for spending time outside. We want to encourage you to take meetings outside. We want to build spaces that have shade so that you can be outside comfortably, cover so that even if it's snowing, you can still go outside and not be kind of snowed on. Access to outlets. It's all the little things that you don't often think about of like, yeah, we made a patio, but no one's using it. Yeah, it's a patio that's in direct Arizona sunlight. No one's going out there because they can't see their screen and they're melting. Put some shade over it, put a fan out there, have an outlet accessible. Now you've made an outdoor space that is highly likely to be used. And so creating those useful spaces can be one of the tricky but very important components.
Yeah. Make sure you have connectivity. That can be a big thing.
Oh yeah.
Because if all of your connectivity in your workspace is wired, then you can't go work on the patio because you can't connect.
Mm-hmm. It's even in IO psychology, right? It's the idea of, have you ever heard the say-do? There's a say-do cultures where if you're gonna say it, you also got to do it. And what we say, we do. So it's not just saying, oh, we support you going outside. We support nature contact. It's actually doing it. It's making sure that you can access the internet from those outdoor spaces, making sure they're actually usable. And welcome to the IO specialty, baby. We can send out some surveys and say, hey, what would make for a space that you would like, that you would use? Collect that data, report on that data, make sure that we're actually building the right spaces, not just integrating nature to integrate it. The bane of my existence, you see this all the time, is when a company says, we want to make our workplaces better. So we're going to bring nature in, to an open plan office. And you're like, because it's this combination of like people love nature and despise open plan offices. And you get kind of counter benefits. Now, if you're going to do an open plan office, at least do it with nature. right? There are some acoustic benefits to noise reduction. There are temperature benefits. There's a lot of benefits to having nature in that style building if you're gonna do it. But it's that overlap of a company saying, oh yeah, we're gonna do open plan as well as nature. And you're like, well, one of those was the right way to go. One of those is gonna be problematic, but if you have to do both, well, here's how you can do it right. But I can go on a whole tirade on that.
So how if you substitute the cubicles for a hedge maze?
An interesting concept of like, it's not a cubicle, it's a hedge maze. You definitely have the benefits of nature contact, right? It's still cubicles, but it's nature. It's
With
natural.
sound dampening. Gotta
Yeah.
have sound
And it would be very
dampening.
sound dampening.
You know, put in some skylights so that you have some
That's-
direct some sun, and then put the hedge.
Welcome to how nerdy I am. There's a book called Cubed that goes through the entire history of the office design and how things came to the cubicle. And part of that, like, I love the idea of it's a concept called like rewilding, where you rewild the cubicle by making it natural, by putting plants on top of it, making it like a hedge maze. I think that's genius. Or even if you wanted to take the most minor change, right? You've got this cubicle style offices. Paint them green, right? Colors are a component. You don't have to do the biggest thing of new windows and putting a tree inside and doing you could just paint things green as the first step. Put a couple of plants. Add some green acoustic panels. Small steps, but that do still have meaningful benefits for health, well-being, physical health, psychological health. I'm reading in the chat. Yeah, there's love and hate for cubicles.
Especially for people who don't understand social boundaries like speakerphones. Of course, now you just keep people walking around in public spaces with their cell phone and speakerphone like this.
Oh yeah. Well, it was part of an interesting comparison and part of the logic of why open plan offices were originally proposed was that it would increase social interaction. It would increase spontaneous interactions by people. And what we're actually ending up seeing is that it reduces it. It's just everyone in the open space with their headphones in so they don't have to hear anyone else, actually more isolated than when they had individual offices.
Yeah.
And the opposite effect of when you add nature into the space, like if you have nature in your central co-area, more people frequent that area. If you look at, there's research in retail even, and retail cares much more about like lingering. How much do people linger in your store? How likely are they to see the kind of store entryway and enter it? And you see drastic increases in both lingering, entering, and intention to return when nature is built into that storefront or that store space. That would also logically apply to the workspace. That if you design your common area with nature, it doesn't have to be that the entire office is designed that way, but people will naturally conglomerate in that natural space. They naturally are drawn to the space that has air and sun and plants and nature. And so it has that benefit as well as kind of this community center. I'll also say, just as a tangent, that is the formal end of the content section of my presentation. This is now moving into the Q&A, questions, and conversation. So feel free, if you have anything else you want to nerd out about, let me know, and I'll be ready to go on that tangent.
So even though we're pretty much at time, Ian, I would be curious to hear what falls under it depends for benefits of nature in the workplace. So I'm assuming we kind of talked around some of those in terms of, allergic
Wait, 1 second.
cats,
My computer
Yeah.
just froze. Could you just start that again one more time? I apologize.
Sure. So just kind of reiterate for you, in case you didn't hear. So we're at time, but curious of what falls under it depends, because I think you were talking about that with the benefits of nature in the workplace. So what would fall under it
Oh, the it
depends?
depends style. So that's in the model that I like. That's the Marseille model from more of the public health perspective. It's a biodiversity and health model. One of those pathways was harm. That contact with nature logically can cause harm in a variety of ways. One of those is the obvious, right? Allergies. Where if I say bring a lot of plants into the workplace, which plants becomes a really good question. And it's one that I actually, on the I think it's actually the 21st of next month, I'm meeting with a bunch of horticulturists and the horticulture club here at North Carolina State University to ask the question and pose the question of, well, what plants? If we got to bring plants in, which ones won't make people allergic? Because that's one of those, it depends, of maybe that would be a bad thing for some people. But you get things like succulents as one good option, where you can have entire succulent walls. I was just visiting Central Michigan University, and one of their buildings has a whole wall of succulents. I was like, that is the coolest thing, and not very pollinating plants, to my knowledge. Again, take this as my knowledge of horticulture, not as good as my knowledge of the applicable side of nature contact more broadly. But the idea of like what plants won't be allergen inducing, or if you have fake plants, now you got to dust them, because people don't think when you have a bunch of fake plants, like they collect dust. If you don't dust them, they're these big dust centers. Or you can dive into, and this is more conceptually, there's not a lot of work around this, but you could imagine that if you're in a workplace and has this beautiful big window and these beautiful landscapes, and then every 2 or 3 days you hear, and it's while they're leaf blowing and mowing the lawns, and there's people moving around and, you know, taking care of all the plants, that movement can actually end up being distracting more than it may be refreshing of your attention, that it could end up distracting you. Or, you know, if improperly done, you have this beautiful water feature in your office, and you're doing your work, and you get a little splash of water on your page, and splash of water, there can be ways to do it improperly, or you have a big sunlight above you and it's like, oh, this is great, but I don't have blinds, or I don't have any way to, when the sun is shining at my computer, to not be melting and or able to see my screen. So there are some of those caveats. Similarly, when Lee mentioned like outdoor environments and making it usable. So it's not just this bright sunlit, no shade, no outlets, no Wi-Fi reception. That would be an example of like, great, you have enabled nature contact, but not in an effective or an efficient way. So I'd say those are at least a few of those kind of it depends situations where things can be done wrong if they're not done carefully or intentionally.
Yeah,
Stephanie's got an interesting question in the chat. If having nature in the workplace creates a sense of longing, because it could be a constant reminder that a person is stuck at work instead of outside.
That's a very interesting idea. I don't think there's much research on specifically longing. What you tend to see more is connectedness, but more that connectedness is kind of an individual variable, that if you have very high nature connectedness, then, you know, having a plant may remind you that you're not in contact with nature. And that feasibly that could be one of those it depends scenarios of too little may engender some sense of longing. The counter to that would be that I believe in the research that exists right now, take this caveated as there's not much research on the dark side of nature, if there is one. It's almost unanimously like this is a good thing. That having that nature, even if it does engender a sense of longing, that it more so still brings you those other benefits. And that it may also bring this kind of like, I wish I was in contact, I wish I was with nature, but that you still do see a benefit of having it in terms of attentional restoration, in terms of mental well-being, physical well-being. It just might be, I'd say, tempered if you have that sense of like this, it's a little plant in a white room with no other nature. I could see how that could engender kind of this sense of like, ooh, but I want to be outside. I want to have more contact. That also begins to tie into how do you do this right? Or how much do you need to do to get over that sense? Do you need just a window? Does the window make you long to be out in the woods? There are going to be levels of that, and there's going to be some key individual difference variables that play in there of how naturally inclined are you as a person to want to be one with nature. That may make you long more and benefit more from really involved outdoor nature and perhaps less from just having a fake plant or a small plant inside. If that makes sense.
The comment from Sarah in the chat about biophobia.
Mm-hmm. The kind of conceptual opposite of biophilia. It's interesting in that it's not, I wouldn't say the direct, this might be the wrong word, but I'm going to use it. I hope it's not like contrapositive, the direct opposite of biophilia, in that biophilia is much more of a theory that humans innately desire to be in contact with nature. Biophobia more frequently, though it can be defined in a few ways, more frequently just refers to this kind of aversion to nature, the idea that we've evolved in these nice ways and that nature can almost be kind of a regression to something that is dirtier, more unpleasant, more uncomfortable, and that there can be an aversion to that kind of environment. At least in the research that we have right now, the benefits of nature appear to be either null or positive for most people. And it is rare to find kind of a true biophobic. It would be a very kind of small subsect of the population worth researching. I don't know that there's enough out right now to make empirical conclusions about people who are biophobic and how they might view interactions with nature. That's also innately fascinating to me as a slight aside. I'm really interested in the dark side. I love nature. I like doing the positive side, but there's a lot that talks about the positive. Innately to me, that makes me go, but what about? What about people who are afraid of animals? Or what about people who are afraid of nature in general, or who are germophobic? Because part of one of the logics describing the benefits of nature is in biodiversity, that you are humans coming in contact with biodiverse nature builds immune system function, it makes you healthier. But if you have germophobia, if you have a contamination phobia, you're innately saying that this is kind of a biological contaminant that is making you stronger and healthier and more functioning, but by connection with microbiota. And that can be something that could be very almost repulsive to some people in the idea of non-controlled, non-sterile environments. I think that's much more rare, but deeply fascinating, and I would say fairly or at least under-researched. And yeah, I see in the chat, some people believe themselves to be biophobes and you gotta like drag them out to go on a hike. And that's really like, yeah, if your entire life is in the workplace and it's all indoors and you're living a completely sedentary lifestyle, the idea of going on a hike, that could be initially a bar too high. That it's physical activity, often in the heat and in the sun, that's going to be physically uncomfortable. And there are some of the kind of compounding factors that make that like, ooh, I don't like that naturey people, those hikey people. I don't like camping. There's gnats out there. There's mosquitoes. That if you bring nature into the workplace, even just in design, right? Natural features, curvature, wooden architecture, things that aren't physically unpleasant, you tend to lose some of those fears or some of those downsides where it's no longer that there's mosquitoes biting you or that your feet hurt because you've been hiking for an hour. There's just wood in your built environment. There's curvature. There's a plant. That some of those can be notably benefits because it's a way to contact with nature without some of those innate downsides of like deep contact. There's a whole concept of Shinrin Yoku, which is the idea of forest bathing, where you kind of go out into the forest and just immerse yourself in a heavily wooded, forested area. It has some really incredible benefits. For people who are like, I am not allergic to all of the trees, like me, ironically, allergic to all of the grass, allergic to all of the insects, terrified of ticks and tick-borne illnesses, there's big, reasonable fears that can get in the way of some of those more involved benefits of like going out into the forest, that if you bring nature in a controlled and responsible way, you don't have those fears, you don't have those downsides. So that ties back into like, how can we do this right? How can we make the best out of this for a wide variety of people, while still acknowledging that there will be people who go, no, nature to me is not plants inside. Nature to me is the depths of a forest at night, where you hear the animals and you feel that crisp cool in the air and you can see all the trees. For that person, that might be the thing they need, and that is someone else's worst nightmare. And that's also where you get into a whole conversation of, well, nature's great, but what about when the park that's nearby isn't safe? Right? Whether it's because there's hypodermic needles on the ground, or because it's not a safe area, there's no lighting to keep you safe if it's at night. There are very real components that would play into someone not getting a benefit of being outdoors and instead feeling more stress, more anxiety. And so as well, finding where you can tie that in to mitigate the fears, mitigate the stresses, but maximize the benefits of that contact with nature that we do know of. There's also a whole concept of nature RX, literally prescribed nature contact. Big in the UK, starting up much more in the US, where physicians can actually give you a prescription to touch grass effectively, to go outside and have contact with nature. Solar punk? Also reading the chat. Idea of solar punk, integrating nature and technology. That sounds cool. That's very like, I guess you could say cyborgs are technically a biological and a technological combined, but even in the idea of technology, one of the coolest studies and applications I was reading was shades that track daylight and give you proper shade throughout the day, so that there's just the right amount of sunlight and it shades the biggest kind of glaring sun throughout the day. And it's architecture that actually moves. Is so cool. Like, those applications are deeply fascinating and awesome to me.
I've seen like blinds that do that, that actually turn, that actually they close
Throughout the day.
get the direct sun, and then they open back up.
I also saw earlier, I think this was Pam, the Australia. Yeah, this is the classic example, right, of the animal and plant flora and fauna in Australia. I was there and I think it was winter, and there's a spider like as big as my face, and the guy was like, "Oh, just wait till summer. That's the male. That's the tiny one. In summer, the female ones are twice the size." Perhaps not the nature that's going to be relaxing and rejuvenating. Perhaps that would be a bit distracting. So making sure to also take into account all of those things of like, what insect life are you attracting? If you have a beautiful live green wall, how are you controlling the insect life that's going to be interacting with that? Are you going to spray a bunch of pesticides? Well, that now invites a whole nother pollutant problem that could be detrimental to health and well-being. So finding that balance is always a tricky but fascinating thing for me.
We get a wall of Venus flytraps.
Honestly, that would be so cool.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Australia.
I can't imagine they're very pollinating.
Flora and fauna are designed to kill you. I don't see that being very relaxing.
We talked about sense of risk, right? That was one of those processes of nature.
Sense of risk. That would be sense of, yeah, that would definitely sense of risk.
Yeah, checking under the toilet seat for the spider, checking around the top of the shower for the snake.
Yeah, well, down there you lift the thing up, the spider grabs it, pulls it back down.
Yeah.
It's like
That's where you learn, like, if you have gloves, I imagine Lee depending on where you've lived, I know in Pennsylvania for sure, it's you always stomp on your gloves before you put them on. Because when in doubt, there's going to be something in there that you don't want, poking your fingers.
Frog. I would have a frog in my
No.
boot at the barn. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Harmless.
that's where I guess you could
Thank
shake that one
God.
out. It's the spiders and the scorpions. Those are the unpleasant ones. Did I miss anything else in the chat?
No, just Brian. He's being Brian. No, at this point, I think we ran a little long, but that's cool as long as people were interested in the topic, which obviously they were. So that's fantastic. So I want to throw out a huge thanks to you, Ian. Thanks for giving of your time and your knowledge. Thanks to all of you who have hung out with us a little long and for your comments and your questions, and of course the humor that we've seen a little bit of as well, because that's always welcome. If for those of you who are interested, this will be on YouTube in a couple of days if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with those who might not have been able to view, or if you were just missed the first part, you want to catch up on it later. We'll put a post out about that in a couple of days when that happens. Also, just for your knowledge, we have got our speakers coming up next month. We're going to have Miss Gracie Winder is going to be talking to us about AI. We're not entirely sure where she's going to go with that quite yet. We think we're going to go L&D, but it's definitely going to be AI. And then we're going to have Ms. Danielle Suprick is going to be talking to us in March. We're going to be talking about more like in the actual industrial aspect of it, like actual industrial things, because she is also an engineer. So she's going to talk to us about the applications in more of that kind of environment, which seriously could use some IO influence. So be checking around. Be at the same time, third Tuesday of the month. So be looking around for that. With that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to wish you good evening. Stay warm out there, because I don't know where you are, but it is cold here. And thank you. And we're going to stop the recording now and get on with our lives. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
I also
everyone.
popped in the chat, Lee, and we can probably share it with the YouTube video as well, my Nature Contact Resources document. So it's got all kinds of good stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks.